Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started here, and I would love to be able to share my screen if possible and get us going on our discussion for the next, I guess we have about 50 minutes together. Okay, so marketing and privacy, I'm sorry to say, are on a little bit of a collision course. It has been building up. And part of it has happened because, frankly, marketing's just got a little bit too good at connecting people and devices to people. We've all had this experience of either somebody telling us that they're certain that their apps are listening to their devices. Fewer of us have probably had the example or the experience on the left, but you see some of the, pure plays and some of the newer e-tailers coming to market with ways to do better customer service. And so back in 2019, Wayfair, the home goods retailer, decided to try to reduce their dependence on a call center and on an 800 number. And they saw that there were certain products that people were buying and looking at on the website that actually required a little bit of hand-holding. So they tested and piloted a program where if they saw a particular consumer on the website, even if they hadn't necessarily been logged in, and they had a phone number for that person, they would call them. Now, that sounds actually like it could be a really good thing if I opted into it. Unfortunately, Wayfair did this, and one of the people that they called without opting them in was a journalist. And of course, that made the press. It made the storyline in the Wall Street Journal. That is a pretty crummy experience if you haven't actually, again, brought your customers into the conversation about whether they want to have this experience or not. And on the flip side, you've got I had a conversation with somebody and they somehow figured out that we were in the same room, they were listening to our conversations, and I saw an ad for the thing that I was having a conversation about. Now, as marketers, I'm not sure how many folks on the call are marketers, but marketers know that this is fundamentally part of the very Byzantine and very labyrinthine set of connections that ad tech and martech enable. We can figure out that two devices were on the same network or on the same IP at the same time. We can see that one of those devices did a search for a particular product, and then we can target the other individual or all of the devices on that network, for example, with that ad. Again, it's easier for people to believe that their apps are listening than for them to understand this very Byzantine and labyrinthine system. But it's not just about the slightly creepy experiences. We can actually do real harm here. So Jillian Brockel, who's a Washington Post reporter, suffered a really terrible experience. Her son was stillborn. And this is a woman who is a tech reporter, right? She fully admitted that she was using the hashtags and clicking on the Instagram ads and hashtagging her own photos, hashtag 26 weeks, baby bump. But when she got home, she wanted out of that loop. She wanted not to see ads about baby and maternity things. And she, somebody in this industry, could not get out of it. Here we're causing real harm. We are causing true harm to human beings. And this is where so much of that tension between marketing and privacy has emerged. Now, at Forrester, we talk about three sort of main forces causing the era of data deprecation. This isn't just about cookies. Your marketing peers will talk a lot about the cookies, but it's not just about that. It's actually the loss of access to lots of different kinds of data, and it's being driven largely by three forces: consumer behavior, legislators and regulators, and the browsing and operating systems, big tech. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. I went into our market research community. We have an online community, and we can ask consumers questions, and we can sort of pull verbatims from them. And it was really striking to me that there were so many people who really felt like advertising has gotten creepy and invasive. People who said, I don't want to see ads for pre-planning funerals just because I'm researching a medical condition. This is a real thing. Teach your algorithm not to be clumsy and awkward. Another person told us that my privacy is a major concern when it comes to personalized experiences from financial services companies. There is a disconnect because we never took time to educate people about personalized marketing and advertising vis-a-vis identity. We have to be better at this. And I think the only personalized experience I want from a company is when I ask for it. This goes back to that Wayfair example. I would like to call them or do live chat or in person when I want that kind of service. I want it on my terms. We forgot human beings when we started to design really advanced marketing and advertising tactics. As a result of that, we have seen a huge spike in consumer attitudes and behaviors around data and privacy. 71% of consumers are aware that their information and activities are being collected by the websites and the apps that they use. This number went up substantially in 2018 after the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica story leaked. When people understood that Facebook was building profiles and sharing that information out to different companies, awareness skyrocketed. 63% of consumers still say it's not okay for companies to track their activities across multiple devices for relevant ads. That means that when I'm doing a search on my work machine, I do not want to see ads for that product on my mobile device. They are different experiences. If I'm logged in, that's one thing, but please don't track me when I'm anonymous or pseudonymous. And damningly, 24% of consumers do not trust any companies. This includes the government. This includes their banks. This includes their healthcare providers to keep their personal information secure. Now, a few years ago, this was a lot of talk, right? People said they were concerned about these things, but they weren't doing much about it. Today they are. 84% of online adults are using at least one privacy-protecting tool. This includes the 43% who block their or who clear their internet browsing history. It includes the 21% who universally block information settings through their devices, so saying apps can't have access to certain kinds of data. And the 20%, 1 in 5 of us, is using private browsing or incognito mode when we want to stay under the radar. Now, I did a webinar with Kemi earlier this year. At that time, I was reporting on 2020 data, and that number was 77%. Today, our 2021 data, it's gone up another 7 points. People are using tools to protect themselves. Now, privacy legislation, I'm not going to belabor this. Everybody who's attending spoke has heard from regulators, heard from legislators, so I'm not going to belabor this slide. But I will point out that privacy legislation is a direct response to consumer and constituent concerns. And it has absolutely, both in the U.S. and across the pond, set its sights on so-called surveillance advertising or surveillance marketing. No one wants marketers and brands to stop doing marketing. What they want is for that marketing to not feel surreptitious. What they want is for our data to not be shared with the businesses that we don't know it's being shared with. And they don't want us to be tracked across websites and apps in a creepy way. Now, regulation and legislative response has actually triggered a big part of the tech platform's position. They are now pitted against each other and the regulators. So we all know about Apple's app tracking transparency, where you can ask an app not to track you across website or across other apps. We know that Google has now pushed out for some time its degradation and deprecation of third-party cookies, but it's not stopping. And part of the reason why it had to stop is because the early flock tests, that's the federated learning of cohorts, the early flock tests showed that ad tech would absolutely leapfrog any attempt at doing the quote-unquote right thing. We saw that ad tech providers, ad tech vendors were using flock cohorts, flock segment data to try to build persistent profiles, in direct opposition to the entire purpose and spirit of cookie deprecation. We are seeing a direct response to consumer attitudes and behaviors here. And we should not rest on our laurels. We just wrote a blog post about this. Marketers and advertisers and brands cannot rest on their laurels just because Google pushed out deprecation for a year. With the changes in consumer behavior that we're seeing, we know that the consumers who care about privacy will switch browsers now that it's become so public. We know that those consumers will use more tools to protect themselves as they browse. That may mean installing. So we cannot get complacent here, because data deprecation actually has a cost to organizations. It costs marketing teams the ability to develop audience insights, to create audience segments. It makes it really hard for them to do ad targeting and specifically ad retargeting. You know those shoes that follow you all around the internet? It turns out some consumers really like that. Advertisers and marketers won't be able to do that moving forward. Marketing measurement is going to get increasingly difficult. I talk about this as though it's the baby that got thrown out with the bathwater. To my mind, a marketer should have the right to measure their marketing performance. And let me be clear that that's what cookies were originally created to do. So when we deprecate all of the third-party cookies, we're also deprecating a marketer's ability to measure their marketing spend. It's going to affect customer experiences. Where customer experience kind of travels across domains, you won't be able to create a connected customer experience anymore. And personalization gets harder. Again, a lot of us on this call are privacy pros, which means that we may be okay with personalization going away. But I'm going to give you a few examples of some consumers who love personalization in just a minute. Customer insights, understanding your prospects, understanding web analytics, who's coming to your website from where are they leaving to? It's going to get harder to do those things. And yes, it even affects security and risk, because cookies and pixels and trackers of all kinds are used for fraud detection. When we deprecate third-party data, we lose some of our ability to do fraud monitoring, and that will create friction in customer experiences. Now, all of these things that I've just talked about, personalization, experiences, retargeting, these are not binary things. It's not that people like them or don't like them. And so it's really important for us to understand privacy personas. Frankly, I just got really tired of people telling me that all millennials don't care about their privacy, and I knew it wasn't true. And so I actually worked with our data sciences team back in 2015 to start to look at privacy attitudes and behaviors within our data set and expand our data set and build a set of profiles and segments to help us understand, what do consumers really care about? And so there are 4 variables that really drive these models. It's their willingness to share more personal information, whether that's for discounts or loyalty points. It's their awareness of privacy issues. Do they read privacy policies? Are they aware of the data economy? Then their comfort with the data economy. How okay are they with that data selling and sharing? And then finally, privacy protective behaviors. Do they use tools to protect themselves online? Do they block information sharing on their devices? What are the tools that they're using, and how many of them do they use? We found over time that we really had 5 primary segments. We started out with 4, but now we have 5 of them, and I'll give you a little picture of each of these for 2020. 17% of online consumers in the U.S. are what we call conditional consumerists. They are tech-savvy and they love to shop. These folks are on social media, they love being on social media, and they're very active there. 93% of them are enrolled in multiple loyalty programs, and they are willing to share that information about themselves for a really wide range of perks. These folks love to feel special. They like special experiences. They like being able to see early releases on products. And they say that technology is important to their lifestyle. 68% of them say that, in fact. Now, they're very privacy aware, and 39% of them are actually willing to share their information only if they can find a place to opt out as well. 31% of them use private browsing, and they are the most likely of our 5 segments to use ad blocking and do not track settings. So these are a really rich source of insight. These are consumers that everyone really wants to be targeting, but are we treating them the right way from a privacy perspective and giving them the right options? Now, the reckless rebels, these were the folks that everyone was like, oh, they're all going to be millennials. Well, here's the thing. They were kind of right. Reckless rebels represent 26% of the online population, and they are easily the youngest segment. So 47% of them are under the age of 35, and nearly 14% are students. They are the second least savvy about the data economy. But even here, these consumers only think, only about a third of them think that cross-device tracking that I told you about a little bit ago, only a third of them are comfortable with that and think it's okay. They take relatively few measures to protect their privacy, and frankly, this cavalier attitude actually leaves them open to some risk, right? We know that some of this segment, particularly the student segment, they actually do migrate to other segments when they have a life stage event, when they have a kid, or when they go out and get their first piece of big credit. But that doesn't mean that we should treat them as though they're always going to be open to sharing their data. Some number of these, for sure, are resigned to the genie has left the bottle, I can't recover my privacy, that ship has sailed. But those consumers who do migrate, we have to be constantly building trust with them. Our third segment are what we call the data-savvy digitals, and they represent about a little over a fifth of the online population. They are pragmatic. They are a little bit older, 47 is their median age, and they're very privacy protective. This segment is the second most privacy aware, and only 6% of them think that it's okay for companies to share or sell their personal information. They like tech, but they're not early adopters. Only about a fifth of them use a smartwatch, and about a quarter of them use a smart speaker. And that's slightly lower than the U.S. national average for these folks. The difference between these guys and the conditional consumerists, who are also very privacy protective and also very savvy of the data economy, is that only 28% of these will share more personal information for points and perks. That's compared to 50% of the conditional consumerists. So these look very similar to the conditional consumerists. They are just a little bit more reserved in their willingness to share data, and a little bit more willing to protect their privacy and use tools online. These are the folks who basically say, listen, I know that I have to be part of the digital economy, and I know that's going to take some data sharing, and so I'm begrudgingly going to go ahead and share it. Now, the nervous unawares are, you kind of have to really feel sorry for them. They represent about 13% of the population. They're concerned, but they're the least educated about the data economy and the least tech savvy. They're concerned about their privacy in the post-digital world. They don't know how to protect themselves. They are the least affluent segment, and they don't, many of them still don't use a smartphone, 12%. In the U.S., that's a really big number. A third of these folks aren't even aware of the privacy tools that we survey them about. We give them a list of all of the different forms of privacy protection tools that are out there, and a third of them say, I don't even know about any of these. The irony is that these folks tell us that they aren't willing to share personal information under any circumstances or for any perks. So they just don't know how much is happening in the background. And our last segment are the skeptical protectionists. And I suspect that we have a few of those in our audience today. This is about a quarter, 23% of the U.S. population. They're the oldest segment, but they're super digital savvy and they're super security conscious, which is different from privacy conscious. They're the largest share of boomers, most likely to be married, and, they're the folks who came up with the Internet, right? They're the folks whose first careers or who first used the Internet in their professional lives, maybe possibly in their college careers, but the majority of them would have used the Internet for the first time in their careers. And they are just really protective, most likely to take measures to prevent data collection, right? So the most likely to use the technologies that are available to them, the phone and device settings that are available to them. 58% of them don't trust anyone to keep their information secure, hence the security consciousness. They learned and heard more about identity protection and identity theft than any other segment. And get this, 53% of them have never used a smartphone to pay for products or services. That's a huge number given how digitally savvy they actually really are. So this is the segment that we need to really pay attention to because, let's be honest, they have disposable income and your marketers are targeting them. So speaking of marketers and how to work with those folks, marketers need to start activating the privacy segments and need to start thinking about privacy through the lens of marketing itself. They need to start thinking about how their privacy peers can help them navigate this world of data deprecation. How can we use our privacy assets, our privacy tools, and our privacy guidance to build the kind of trust with consumers that lets us turn around this data deprecation boat? There are three pillars here that form a customer-first privacy experience. The first is transparency, and what I mean here is that you just have to provide really clear explanations of the data that you're collecting and how you're using it. You have to make your privacy experiences human understandable. And you have to be really responsive when customers request information about what you're doing. Now, that second bullet point is really important. And again, I suspect that we've got a few lawyers on the phone here or on the conference. And I want to be really sensitive about this, but privacy experiences shouldn't be designed by lawyers. And I'll give you a few examples of what I mean in just a minute. But we would never let a product designer design a product page on a website. That's not their forte. We have to make privacy experiences that are human understandable. The second pillar here is meaningful choice, and this is really about data minimization, right? So this is about giving customers options for data collection that are progressive. Don't make me give you my name, my email address, my zip code, like all of this information in the first instance that you're asking me for information. What is the minimum information that I can provide you to get the service or the product or the information that I need in a reasonable way? That means data minimization without breaking experiences. And allowing customers to opt down instead of just giving them a nuclear opt-out. Customers don't always want to get rid of our brands entirely, but we are often over-marketing to them, whether that's retargeting in a display sense, retargeting in email, or just email in general or mobile notifications. And finally, the third pillar is around a fair value exchange. And remember, a fair value exchange has a different meaning for different customers depending on their privacy persona and depending on their relationship with your brand. You have to ensure that that trade-off of data to value is balanced and fair based on what the customer expects. And you have to pass the reasonable expectation test with every new use of data. Now, your marketers are not doing this today. They have huge data assets, tons of first-party data. And there will be vendors, and there will be agencies, and there will be other marketers saying, hey, did you know that this is a cool thing that you can do with your first-party data? We have to ask them to take off their marketer hats, put on their human hats, and ask whether their customers, your customers, would expect them to be using that data in the way that they're about to. Now, this is all fairly esoteric, so let me give you some concrete examples. Now, really thinking about privacy experiences through a human-centered design lens is really important. Let's be really honest with ourselves here. We made everything about privacy experiences inscrutable. Privacy is my day job, and it still takes me hours to wade through the various privacy policies, permissions, settings, terms of service for the various sites and apps that I use every week. We can simplify this. And I'm not suggesting that the legal document, which is a privacy policy, goes away. But what I am suggesting is that we organize that information in ways that answer customer questions more simply in a two-tier system. And this is exactly what ClassDojo has done. They have taken those critical questions that teachers and parents have and put them on a privacy center where they are answered simply and clearly. Now, if you want to drill into the legalese, you can by clicking the link. But at a glance, you can see what somebody's questions, what somebody's posture is on things like data ownership, on things like how long do you hold my data after my student is no longer in the system, and how can I delete my student's data if I decide to stop using the system. Away also organizes their data control page very, very clearly and very simply. And the flow, the experience of requesting your data or deleting your data or correcting your data is very simple and very clear. Lawyers and compliance teams should not be responsible for designing privacy experiences. That's transparency. Now, on meaningful choice, there's a lot of things that we see from the cookie consent side, which are not really personalized, right? They're not personal to the brand. And that's really important. On the right-hand side, you see JamieOliver.com, and they're really clear about what they use their cookies for, and it's incredibly human. And I love that they call out and point out that their functionality cookies include social media cookies. Many brands don't do this, and it can be a surprise to consumers when they've opted into functionality but not into targeting and advertising, but what they actually end up seeing is targeting and advertising in the social media platform. It feels creepy to them. So Jamie Oliver calls that out, and they explain the use of this data in really, really clear English. On the left-hand side, you see Banana Republic, and they recognized that I wasn't opening their emails. I appreciate that they said, hey, do you want to still receive them? And if so, why don't you click on this button and update your preferences about the things that you want to hear about? Do you just want to hear about sales? Do you just want to hear about petite fit clothing? That is a way for me to minimize the messaging that I get from them, but personalize it. And by the way, it benefits Banana Republic because they're not spending money on targeting me with things I'm not interested in, and I've given them a signal, a cue, that I am only interested in their petite fit clothing. That is unbelievably valuable information for Banana Republic. This is about meaningful choice. And finally, fair value exchange. I don't know if anybody has ever signed up for Stitch Fix or Home Chef, which are the two screenshots you're seeing here, but holy cow, they run you through a ringer. They ask you all kinds of questions. In the Stitch Fix case, about your fit and your height and what kind of body type you have and what kind of shaped clothing you like. And then they actually let you refine the results when you're searching for product on the basis of people like me. So there is a real value exchange for all of those questions that I spent time answering. In the case of Home Chef, I go through and I click all these radio buttons and I update my preferences and I update my settings and my choices, and I can tell them things like, I'm really intimidated by cooking big cuts of meat with bone in them. It's that granular. But again, what it means is that the menus and the boxes that they ship me are tailored. They're tailored to the things that I like. And if I tell them, I don't really like cooking bone-in, but I'm willing to experiment, they will send me an email saying that there's 2 options for a given recipe. Do you want to try the bone-in version? That's value exchange. I am willing to give them all of this information so that I can get a really great experience in return. So, what can you do? I've given you these examples. What can you actually do if you know your customers' privacy personas to optimize your communications? Well, I've told you that the conditional consumerists really value transparency and relevant benefits in exchange for their data. But remember that they will check in on you over time. They want to make sure that you're not using their data in a way that they don't expect. They want to make sure that there's a way for them to opt out if they don't like the way that you're using their data. And if they decide to stop using your service, they want the ability to close an account and say goodbye. Reckless rebels won't always stay that way. So communicate in the channels where they are, especially those younger reckless rebels, to build trust over time. And those reckless rebels that are just resigned to the genie having left the bottle, well, you've still got to build trust with them. They're still more loyal to the brands that they actually think are going to be trustworthy. The data-savvy digitals, those are the folks that demand really meaningful choices and really easy opt-outs. And you've got to respect their privacy signals. If these folks come to your website using a do not track signal, respect that. See it in the same way that you would see a CCPA don't sell my personal information request. That's really important for these folks. The nervous unawares just need reassurance. Keep your interfaces really simple. Show your intent about your data uses, and really do simplify the way that you explain the way that you use their data. Remember, most of these folks don't even realize that the data economy exists at the scale that it does. So just be cautious with them. And finally, the skeptical protectionists, they need shows of consistent integrity. These are the folks who, I'll admit it, we wear the tin hat. We are really, really willing to exercise our privacy rights. We have to show the skeptical protectionists that our brands are trustworthy, that we have integrity when it comes to data use, and really simplify and make it easy for them to exercise their privacy rights. If you tie these together with the 3 pillars of privacy communication, experiences, transparency, and value exchange, you can build a marketing strategy that really actually wards off data deprecation, because the most important customers will share more information with you over time. And with that, I would like to hand things back to Camille for a conversation and to answer some of your questions.
Marvelous. Thank you so much. And I also encourage our listeners, and by the way, I've gotten texts on my private devices saying, Fatima rocks. So we'll start there. So I want to encourage people to ask questions or comments. Fatima rocks. Secondly, I want to thank you for really speaking in my /marketing language here by giving us personas, giving us segments, elucidating, and this part might be less familiar to privacy professionals, but elucidating that most businesses do have an 80-20 rule where it is very important for them to recognize who are their most important customer targets and to be able to communicate accordingly. It's not to say that most businesses don't have a mix, but what this segmentation does, I think, for people on this call is help us think about how do we translate privacy as a reactive or perceived roadblock into a positive, particularly through the lens of a particular segment. So I encourage people to think about which segment might be their segment, and to even ask questions about being more granular questions about what would you do for this segment. On that note, overall, there are probably segments in your sharing that if a marketer had them in their as a main cohort, they would be most concerned around the deprecation of third-party cookies. Which segment or segments would you say that is? And given this reprieve that we've had, what moves should they start taking now to be ahead?
Yeah, so it's actually, this one's kind of easy to answer. Somebody is concerned and that they're in one of these segments or cohorts when they come to your website using a privacy protective browser, right? Those are Firefox, Brave. Right?
Yeah.
They're sending a very, very clear signal that they are a privacy protective consumer. Mm-hmm. And so my recommendation to marketers is always to recognize that and be really clear about explaining. And so what you want to do is actually look at the breakdown of site visitors, right? And you want to look at what the behavioral differences between those consumers is, and design your cookie consent for them. Now, the thing about that is part of the challenge with cookie consent is that it's not really in the consumer's hands anymore.
Right.
When the browser says we're not going to allow cross-site cookies anymore, that's that.
Yeah.
So a big part of it is if you do see those consumers who are visiting with those privacy protective browsers, your interface and your dialogue with them has to be one of, we would like you to authenticate, but here is why. Mm-hmm. Because once they've authenticated, you don't need that third-party data anymore.
There you go. I think you should maybe say that again. Although the privacy people certainly know this, but maybe say it again for the marketing people.
Got it.
Yeah. Give another pitch for how much power there is to be derived in authenticating for first-party and even zero-party data.
Yes. Thank you for bringing up zero-party data. So the idea is that the cookie consent issue and the cookie issue, cookie deprecation issue, is one of third parties and specifically cross-site tracking cookies, right? So if you can get a site visitor to authenticate, and authentication, I don't mean username and password, I mean they're agreeing to be tracked on your first-party domains. They are agreeing to give you an email address so you can create a record for them. They're agreeing to say, hey, I want to receive mobile notifications from you. I'm giving you my phone number. Any one of these first-party or zero-party data assets mitigates your need for third-party data. And that means that by respectfully, transparently asking people to provide that first-party data to authenticate, you have much less to worry about in the third-party context.
And it's naturally sets you up for being in dialogue with a consumer, which then sets you up for personalization tracks. I feel through your presentation, which I loved, that on one hand, there's privacy being seen as a roadblock by marketers. And on the other hand, there is the underused possibility of seeking in a trusting way more information that will lead to more personalization. And I feel like all of the segments have had to react to bad experiences, and it colors the water when we could actually have positive experiences around personalization. Ultimately, you want the vendors you're working with to actually understand what you need.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. One of the things that we see routinely, I'll encourage anybody to go to their favorite social networking website or their least favorite and look at the interests section of your profile. Go look and see what that social network thinks you are interested in. And that's the information that they're targeting ads to you based on. I guarantee you there is tremendous inaccuracy. A person that I work with sent me a link to theirs. And it couldn't have been more wrong. You know, the kinds of things, and I'll just give an example. They thought that this person was a fan of the NRA. Person is about as progressively liberal as they come. And so the idea of them being a fan of the NRA was really like, how did this even happen? Like, what were the signals that even triggered this interest? No pun intended. So the idea there is like, if the personalization, in big air quotes, is happening on the basis of third-party data, it is often inaccurate.
Often wrong.
Often wrong. And so if you are able to get a customer to tell you what their interests and their preferences and their intentions and their context are, the way that Stitch Fix and Home Chef can, boy, you're targeting on the basis of really good data. And they'll tell you when you're wrong. They'll tell you when their context changes.
Right. Okay, so as opposed to the poll that we saw at the beginning, which showed that essentially privacy and marketing seem to work together on an ad hoc way, and which from the beginning of my marketing career, there's always a moment when you're running a campaign where you, quote, ask the lawyer. And typically that is near the end, not at the beginning. And now thankfully we have privacy officers who are thinking, I would say, on a level that is even beyond compliance. It is to the values of privacy. So all this leads to say that if we have in our nirvana privacy people and marketers collaborating on end to end, what information are we asking for what purpose? Obviously, this would be a better experience. And you've shown us some good experiences. I'd love your thoughts on where you see other good experiences or underused experiences for collaboration, or whole industry sectors that might be missing the point, or terrible experiences, whichever one will cause us more thinking.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of, I don't think that there are industries per se that I see, but what I do see is a really big difference in the quality of experiences and the ability to work together end to end when there are chief privacy officers that understand and embrace business strategy and don't come to the table merely and solely from a risk prevention perspective, but from a business value perspective. So the answer is not no, don't do this. The answer is, marketer, what are you trying to achieve? How can we do that? How can we find a way for you to do that? It may not happen tomorrow the way that this campaign would, but can we build up to it? How can we do that? So that's probably the single biggest difference I see in companies that have some degree of maturity between their CMOs and CPOs, and the way that those groups work together. That's really the biggest difference. There is a creepiness factor and an EQ factor. And I think that marketers need to do a better job of that. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a financial services client who really knew that they needed to level up their digital marketing practices. Like, they had just been they'd been laggards, really. And so they hired a very sort of sophisticated digital marketer, and they brought this person in. And I did an inquiry with this person who asked me, hey, so because of the way that we use pixels, which are similar to cookies but sit inside an image or a piece of content, we can see exactly what home somebody was looking at on a home buying website. And so I want to use the image of the home that they were looking at in my ad, inviting them to come and look at our mortgage product. That face, Camille, is exactly it, right?
Yeah, and I was actually kind of trying to keep it down. It really is.
Now, could they do it legally? Sure.
Yes.
Nothing precluding them from doing it. But is it human-centric at all? And what is the cost of doing that? And this is where, again, the CPO who has a business orientation is really valuable, because that privacy person could say to that marketer, listen, maybe you get a slightly bigger bump on click-through rates because that person is curious about the ad, but what does it do to your conversion? What does it do to your brand? And
trust.
And trust. And what does it do from an actual customer lifetime value perspective if you creep out somebody for whom you were in the consideration set of purchasing? They were thinking about our bank, but now because of that ad, they're not going to.
Right, except negatively.
Exactly. A privacy-oriented or a business-oriented privacy practitioner can ask that question.
Right. And share common human values together and ultimate value goals for brand. I've been told that we're actually out of time, and which is time goes quickly with you, Fatima. I see Angie, and I guess I should just say Thank you, Fatima. And I also should say to all of our participants that we will be sharing your slides and looking forward to further interactions on this topic and thought leadership from you, Fatima, very much.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you to the entire Wire Wheel team. It's always a pleasure to work with you guys.